here with Nicole Service, who was with us at the Rape Crisis Center back in the day. She is now residing in Florida and is you're a therapist in private practice, right? Is that what you're doing, private practice?
Yeah, so I'm actually back in
Nicole?
South Carolina. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can hear you. All right. Is anyone not frozen? Or is
Am I
it just...
back with you guys?
Yes, I can hear you.
Of course, as soon as the stream goes live, I get your internet connection is unstable, and I'm like, it's really not. It's okay, Zoom. Calm down. So anyway, sorry about that. I am actually back in South Carolina.
You're back in South Carolina.
Mm-hmm. Oh boy.
I feel like we're having technical difficulties.
Sorry, I don't know. Like, there's really no issue on this end. I'm gonna log out and log back in.
Okay, that is totally fine. Take your time. So anyway, while we wait for Nicole to try and log out and log back in, we have our comms intern Brynne with us, and we have our well, she's our former sociology intern. She is on our board, kind of like our college outreach person, I would say, Tyler. So we are excited to talk about abortion and why these abortion bans are bullshit. But while we wait for Nicole, do you guys want to talk about what you have going on at Coastal coming up? Miss Ty.
Oh, look, she's back. Yeah, I mean, there are some events coming up. We recently, well, I don't know, does everyone know that we had a women's march, like, on here? Okay, we did that. We have some women, like, kind of like suffrage and like voter suppression, like templates that we're printing out for the school. And on Monday, we're doing voter registration. And Brynne, who's our comms intern, will be kind of walking around campus asking people why they think voting is necessary. And hopefully we got to get a lot of responses about abortion and reproductive rights being an issue with a lot of our political candidates, and like the lack of care and accessibility issues, especially in South Carolina. So yeah.
We have that problem here. We have like 2 places where people can go get abortions, I think. And that's just obviously not enough. So now that Nicole's back, Nicole, I think the last thing that I heard from you was that you moved back to South Carolina. So, and then I was asking if you were practicing therapy right now.
Yeah, so I am back in South Carolina. I've been here for a couple of months, not for very long. I am doing private therapy now, but I've spent the last 5 years in Rape Crisis, first in Myrtle Beach, and then actually in Pensacola. I was still with Rape Crisis, just in a different town, and which was actually a really good experience to see that the issues that we have were not necessarily... Oh, did I lose you again?
No, you are still here.
Okay. So it was good to see that everything, well, it wasn't good to see, but it was eye-opening to see that all of the problems in South Carolina exist elsewhere as well. So it's definitely a national problem.
Yeah. That's definitely a good thing to remind people who kind of get disheartened living here in South Carolina, that, you know, these issues are not just here in the state, they are everywhere. And so since you did live in Florida for a little while, you kind of have you have an understanding of both places. So let's just talk about, you know, like these abortion bills and the bans that have been either put in the pipeline or signed into law and then, appealed and they're waiting in the courts, how that affects victims and survivors of sexual violence, how, South Carolina put a provision in for exceptions of rape and incest, like how that doesn't even really matter. It's not enough. It doesn't go far enough, obviously, but it's really not, in my opinion, it's not going to really do anything. So we kind of want to hear from you. What's your take on everything that's happening right now?
So, like almost everyone who believes that abortion is a right, I think it's all very bad, to put it mildly. I almost have to admire the Texas bill because they don't even pretend to care about survivors of rape and incest or about people who might die because of their pregnancy. Like, at least they're repping what they really believe, which is that they don't care whether or not pregnant people live or die. So, I have to say, at least they're doing that. But overall, having an exception for rape or incest doesn't really do much to help those people. Because what are then going to be the guidelines for who can have an abortion because of rape, incest, or some other form of sexual assault? Do they have to have made a police report? Do they have to name their perpetrator? Do they have to get a DNA test on the embryo? What are the requirements that they have to meet in order to say, okay, you do meet the rape or incest exception? And to me, unless you can just walk in to a clinic or somewhere where they perform abortions and say, I was raped, I need an abortion, what other requirements are there going to be? So it really doesn't do much. And I think the interesting thing is a lot of people who are very anti-abortion are also the same people who believe that there are just masses and masses of false rape reports out there. And they're basically creating a scenario that doesn't already exist to give someone incentive and motive to make a false report. Which is something that I'm not sure that they've considered. Most people don't want to make a false report, but if it's between that and getting life-saving medical care, like I might lie about it, And then the question becomes, okay, like we were talking about, do you have to name your perpetrator? Do you have to say, this was my grandfather, this was my cousin, this was my brother, which could be dangerous for a whole host of other reasons, And in order to protect people who truly are pregnant because of rape, incest, sexual assault, coercion, whatever you want to call it, or even people who are in a domestic violence situation, maybe it was consensual, but having their abuser's baby is going to be the end of their life, more or less. Unless it's accessible for everyone, it's not really accessible for those people who we kind of all agree, except for Texas, who should have access to abortion no matter what.
I think it's really hard you can't really draw a line on like what's like, can I get an abortion or can I not? Like it's very blurry. And then the laws it's not doing anything, like Ashlyn said. So yeah, anyway.
I also, I'm not a political science major. I'm not a politician. I just work with people who have been through abuse and are dealing with this. But, to me, abortion has always been so politicized that it's always about the right saying we need to fundraise because there's so much abortion going on, and the more money you give us, the more the more likely it is that we'll be able to outlaw abortion. And the left never really codifying Roe because they fundraise off it as well. And to me, it's like none of this really has the best interests of a pregnant person who desperately needs an abortion at heart. We need it to be law. We need it to be protected forever. And we need it to not be a distraction anymore. We need to focus on climate change and voting rights and racial justice. And we need to just move past this. We really do. So that's just my personal take. Again, I'm not an expert in that area, but I think for someone who really cares about this, it's so frustrating, especially when you see ultra Catholic countries like Ireland saying we got to allow abortion. We can't just let people die because of this anymore. And I know Ashlyn, so my cousin, which is the correct term for your cousin who's also your best friend, had twins last summer. And if anything radicalized me more about being pro-abortion, it's having pregnant friends. You know, I don't have any children. You know, I might need to access abortion if anything scary ever happened in that way. But I know for you, having the experience that you had with your twins probably radicalized you even more, if you want to talk about it at all.
Yeah, I mean, so pregnancy itself is just like a dangerous condition that someone should be able to choose, you know, whether they want to continue it or not. There's like a whole slew of things that can go wrong. I ended up having postpartum preeclampsia, and usually people have preeclampsia from like week 20 on. So they usually have it during pregnancy. I had it afterwards, which is even more rare and also harder to find and more of a dire situation. And then so I had a whole bucket full of problems with the hospitals here. But, you know, having a near death situation happen after you've given birth is a whole other experience that, you know, most people don't have. I was already pro-choice and I said pro-abortion before this, but it brought up the point that even if someone like wants to be pregnant, like they have to know that it is dangerous on its own, and they have to like just want to continue that, you know. Things like this happen to other people, and then maybe they want to have more kids afterwards, but then that happens and it changes their minds. So like me personally, I'm not having any more kids. I was a little iffy on whether I wanted any more before. I'm like, oh, 3 is a good number, but maybe 4. And now I'm just like, no freaking way, not 4, not again, never being pregnant again. So that is one thing that I think a lot of people just don't talk about, is like the health risks that come along with being pregnant. And then of course we know that Black women have even more of a health concern while being pregnant. I think like they have 3 or 4 times more of a chance of dying during childbirth or like after childbirth. And I think that is even a larger discrepancy in South Carolina. So that is, you know, something that in and of itself should be a no-brainer for everybody, but clearly it's not. But I'm particularly interested in expanding upon like the no, you're fine. You're fine. Why don't you go ahead and respond, and then I'll ask the other question, because it'll be kind of a different topic.
So I think too what you talked about how abortion is not just a medical issue, it's a racial issue, it's an equality issue, it's who really suffers medically for having these pregnancies. Another interesting thing is the right to life. People always claim like, well, you can always give the baby up for adoption, which doesn't alleviate any of the medical risk while you're pregnant. But also studies show that people don't choose between abortion and adoption. Studies show that people first choose whether or not to have an abortion or remain pregnant. And then after that point is when they start to think about, am I going to keep this baby or am I going to give this baby up for adoption? That like the idea, our brains don't work like that. You know, it's not like, okay, am I completely going to terminate this issue in my life, or am I going to go all the way through it and give the baby up for adoption? Like those are 2 very separate choices. And the idea that people make them at the same time is, you know, a fallacy, I think, and really hurts people, because, you know, you don't think about what you're going to do with the baby until you decide if you're injuries would be in if I had to be pregnant. You know, I don't want to put myself through that, and I shouldn't have to.
Yeah, it's definitely that is a huge part of it. And I think that, you know, even if someone ends up continuing the pregnancy and like choosing adoption, who's paying for all the medical bills, you know, and it's expensive. It's expensive. So if they're considering terminating the pregnancy because of money, and someone's going to talk them into, no, you know, have it and then give it up for adoption, like it's not really going to be very helpful, especially when we don't have coverage like most other first world countries do. Any, you know, nation that cares about its people or claims to gives them health care. We don't have that. So that right there puts a burden on anyone who wants a pregnancy. Ty or Brynne, did you have anything you wanted to add?
Yeah, I just was gonna go back to how you were talking about how women of color, specifically Black women, have substantially higher rates of miscarriages and death both before giving birth and during. And I just think like even when we see, you know, prestigious Black women in our society like Beyonce and Serena Williams coming about talking about how they almost died during birth and how their doctors weren't listening to them. And, you know, Beyonce was like, I knew something was wrong. There was something wrong. And I kept telling my doctor and they didn't listen to me. And I can't remember if she was like sepsis or something, but it's just crazy. Like it happens to famous people. I can't imagine. I mean, I can't imagine because I've seen it, but what is happening in like low income communities, especially in like in Texas right now, I can't imagine what they're going through.
Yeah, and here in South Carolina, Williamsburg County is it is the poorest county in South Carolina. They have one hospital for the whole entire county. So you can imagine that the people living there don't have access to, you know, quality health care. And if you only have one hospital, how are you going to get all of your appointments, you know, keep up with them? How far does it take to get there? There's just a whole lot of problems that plays into it. And I think that, you know, we kind of just frame it as like it's your right, like it's your bodily autonomy, which is obvious, yes, to us, like that is 100% correct, but other arguments get overlooked. And I think one thing that is unique to your perspective, Nicole, being a rape crisis counselor previously, you know, like just so much about how people operate, like after they have been assaulted, and how things go with law enforcement anyway. So when those things happen, you know, I just don't think that the people who put these laws into place or wrote these pieces of legislation considered like how complicated they've made it. How do you, you know, what do you think about how realistic it would be for, you know, a rape victim to then like prove that they were raped and they're pregnant?
Well, rape is almost impossible to prove, really, unless you have an admission. It used to be rapists would just say, I've never seen this person before, she's lying. Now that we have DNA, they say, well, it was consensual. And they're like, well, it's he said, she said, you know, what are we going to do? And that's that. And that's another barrier. Like, okay, someone reports the rape and reports the perpetrator, and then the police say, sorry, we can't pursue this. Does that then bar someone from being able to get an abortion because it's not an actionable rape charge? It's really interesting because you see this kind of at work even in the hospital. So you have a victim who was sexually assaulted, who does what we all think the right thing is, although I will say there is no right thing, you know, everybody handles trauma differently, but they've done what we perceive as the right thing, which is go to the hospital immediately, report to the police, get a rape kit done. I cannot tell you how many times in South Carolina the ER doctor, when, especially like if it's the middle of the night, if it's a smaller hospital, there's only one doctor on duty, refuses to prescribe Plan B. Will not prescribe it. It's against their beliefs or whatever. And usually the answer is like, well, she can just go to the pharmacy and get it. And I just want to ask you, like, imagine the most physically, mentally, emotionally traumatic thing that you could ever experience. If you've never been sexually assaulted, imagine that you walked in on someone murdering your wife or your mom or your sibling, and you watched them murder them, and then you had to fight them off yourself and you have injuries. Like, that is the kind of trauma we're talking about. And then you go to the hospital and you spend hours talking to the police and hours talking to the doctor. And it's been 7 hours since this happened. And all you want to do is crawl into a hole and die, but you got to stop by CVS and get yourself an antibiotic. Like, it's not going to happen. Besides the fact that, you know, a lot of people just in this country don't have an extra $40 or $50 to spend on that, especially when it should be free. Now, what they'll say is, well, they can be reimbursed by VOCA. And as someone who has done those reimbursement forms, like, it's not an easy process, and you still have to front the money. And this is honestly why I feel like we need to take beliefs. It's a medical procedure. And Plan B is just birth control. I mean, you know, are these doctors like unwilling to prescribe a condom? Like, what are we talking about here? You know, I've gotten in fights about it before. I learned not to fight about it and just try to figure out a way for me to get money directly from the center to get the person the Plan B. But when you think about that happening in the ER, and you have a victim who just isn't ready to follow up with rape crisis, doesn't want to do anything right now, which is super common, and then 8 weeks later realizes that they're pregnant and needs an abortion. You know, and I wish this was an uncommon thing, but it's not. So the act of denying people who have been sexually assaulted the right to decide what is happening with their reproductive organs can start really quickly, as soon as hours after the rape. And if that's the experience that Oh, I can't.
Yeah.
You're muted. Okay, can you hear me now?
I can hear you now, yes.
Okay. Well, I have no idea where in my rant the sound went out, but but I will just say, if you were a rape survivor and that was your experience in the hospital, how likely would you be to trust that if you went to another doctor that they would do the right thing by you? And this is why I kind of think you should be able to access an abortion in any gynecologist's office, in any emergency room, especially since most abortions are medical, right? All you really need is a couple of pills. It's not like usually a really invasive procedure. So, you know, any of you who have ever worked, I know Ashlyn has been on these calls, and it's like, when the first thing that you're doing to take care of yourself, because in the ER after a sexual assault, almost everything you do is to build a police case. Not a lot of it really has to do with taking care of you physically. The very first thing that you say to take care of yourself is, give me Plan B. And they're like, no, sorry, I don't believe in that. Like, where is your faith going to be? I mean, it's just, we have to take I don't know, I guess I would say the activism of doctors and, you know, people out of it, and say, like, if you're not willing to prescribe this, you can't be in the ER. If you're not willing to give this very basic level of medical care to the over 50% of people who can reproduce, like, you can't be in that field. You know, I'm a therapist. I worked in rape crisis. I can't say, you know, but sorry, I don't believe in being gay, so I can't see any gay victims. Like, I would never be hired for that job because I'm not qualified. You know, just because you went to medical school doesn't mean you're qualified to care for all people. Go into geriatric medicine if you cannot handle dealing with reproduction.
Yeah. Samantha actually left a comment on Facebook, like, kind of verifying what you said. When she was a farm tech, she said that everyone who ever came to the counter to ask for Plan B was embarrassed or scared to ask for it, on top of, you know, whatever else they were picking up, like, oh, and I need Plan plan B too, without people hearing it because they're ashamed. So that's like a big thing, the shame and the trauma that people who were just assaulted may be feeling otherwise. Imagine having to then go and prove that you were assaulted and you're pregnant by this assault. We know that like most rapes go unreported. So like, how does that make sense? Like, how do you even see that playing out?
I mean, it can't. And the way I see it playing out is too many people being forced to have their rapist babies.
Mm-hmm.
And then you get into the whole mess of the number of states where rapists have the right to parental rights, I guess you could say, where they
Your sound went out again. Your computer hates us. No, it's still out. Still can't hear. Sound went out. Ty and Brynne, can you guys hear me?
I can hear you now.
Okay. Yeah, your sound went out again. Every time you get on a little roll, it's like, nope, we're going to stop Nicole from speaking.
Zoom is like, Nicole, let Ty and Brynne and Ashlyn talk. Damn it.
No, we're just going to blame it on Zuckerberg. He's doing something.
I bet he is. I bet he's like listening to this and be like, oh, I don't like this. The ladies are going to get ideas.
Oh, yes. But you were talking about the states that allow rapists to like sue or petition for parental rights.
To me, that's reason enough to want to terminate a pregnancy by someone who sexually assaulted you. Mm-hmm. And no one should ever be forced to have someone who did that to them be in their life forever.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's inhumane.
I totally agree. So I'm going to go ahead and call on Brynne and Ty, not Ty, she's eating, but Brynne, what do you think about all of this? What is your opinion? How do you see this playing out?
So so my freshman year, I had to do this assignment and I had to listen to this TED Talk. It's by Jackson Katz, I think. And he's talking about, do you know what I'm talking about?
I don't know if I know which talk you're referring to, but I like that man.
Oh, okay. No, yeah. Love him. Done some readings on him. But the one that I listened to, it was called like It's a Man's Problem, or at least, it should be. And I was just thinking while we were talking about this and birth control and why I've actually been looking into this too. Why isn't there okay. So society has said that women should be on birth control. It's their problem. They need to deal with it. Where's the birth control for men? And I've just been thinking about that. And I've been researching, like you could get a vasectomy, but then it's this whole thing. But I don't know. That's what I was thinking about. And I'm just wondering why society has made it a woman's problem. Which, I mean, I know why, because women have been repressed and whatnot. But I'm just wondering, like we're in, 2021. So I don't know. That's what I was thinking about. So.
Well, I was going to say going on rants like I just did is the birth control for men. But you're absolutely right. The problem is a lot of abusers and rapists seek to impregnate. It's one really good way to assert power and control over a woman. And I think if people really understood the number of abusive relationships where rape occurs within a marriage, within a partnership on a daily basis, and the partner who flushes birth control pills, who sabotages any form of birth control because making this person be pregnant by them would basically put them under their control, they think, forever. Yet another reason why we can't ask these questions, because okay, a woman goes to a clinic and says, I've been raped, I need an abortion. Who raped you? My husband. Well, that opens up a whole other thing. Spousal rape has been legal until the last 25 years or so in a lot of places. So it really, I love what you said, Brynne, because, I know plenty of men who do everything within their power to make sure they're not getting people pregnant because they don't want that responsibility. But people who are abusers and rapists, for some reason, see spreading their seed and impregnating people as just another form of dominance, and they are never going to take responsibility for it, which is another reason why we need access to abortion for everyone all the time.
Mhm. And if we get into the whole the part of incest, that is even, I think, more complicated and messy and traumatic. Let's, just like insert in a random SVU episode and we will all see like how this stuff just does not really work. Someone gets impregnated by their stepfather or their father, like how is that, what support are they going to have, and how is that going to even play out? Like how will they be allowed to get an abortion? They probably won't. If they're underage, what are the laws? I know they're different in every like state pretty much, but I know some states you require like parental permission. So, if they're in a state that requires that, how's that going to happen? None of these things like seem really thought out. So I guess, do you think in states that would enact some legislation like this, do you think rape crisis centers are going to be like even more like used? Or do you think you guys would see like an influx of like people coming for help than previously?
Can you guys hear me?
I can hear you, but yes,
okay.
I can hear you.
So to be perfectly honest, incest and rape by a family member is one of the most difficult things for people to report. We're often almost all the time talking about underage people. They don't really know to call rape crisis and they might not have the freedom to do so. I honestly doubt this would lead to an increase among rape crisis centers.
Nope, you're gone now. Every time you get animated and on a roll, it wants to shut you down. We can literally only blame the tech gods for what's happening on Zoom tonight.
Can you guys hear me now?
Mhm.
I am so sorry. I don't know what the deal is. I use this all the time for clients and I like never have issues. So I
You're
apologize.
way too feminist tonight for this.
I guess, is this how you break the internet? Saying things that 1,000 other people have said as well? No.
Yeah.
It would honestly be great if we did see an influx of those calls, because then we could report those statistics, to VAWA, to our state level funding, and say like, look, the rate of incest is actually. Can you hear me? Okay. The rate of incest and the rate of, I guess, familial rape is a lot.
Let me try turning.
I'm gonna let someone else talk now.
All right. I might have a little hack. Try turning off your video and then talking.
Okay.
We will see if that works for you. Okay.
I like that better anyway.
Well, I don't, because now I can't see you. But you were saying like the rate or like the statistics are probably underreported.
They're definitely underreported. I feel like if you're underage and being raped by a family member, the barriers to reporting that are almost insurmountable to start with. And then you're talking about it being the only way to access an abortion. It really makes me think that, well, these laws just aren't very well thought out, because I'm thinking, okay, what if I was a 14-year-old whose like stepbrother was raping her and my mom doesn't want me to say anything because my stepdad is the one who pays for everything and she doesn't want me to, like, what would I do? How would I free myself from that situation? And I wish that was an odd situation, but it's not. So I wish that it would lead to an influx of reporting, but it almost certainly won't. And then what you'll have is people who enact these laws saying, see, there really isn't even much of a need for this. You guys are really overreacting. And that's how it'll go down.
So I know that like when South Carolina specifically like put forth their heartbeat bill, it was apparently like too extreme, and then the rape and incest provisions were added. So I guess I wonder if it would be even like a strategy to kind of tell, you know, these lawmakers like, hey, you supposedly care about like rape and incest victims, but have you thought about this, like how practical this is? Like if you really want to protect them, then you need to actually make sure that they can have access to abortions, and putting these restrictions in place is just going to create kind of like a bunch of like not loopholes, but like hoops that they have to jump through, and a bunch of different like things that they might have to meet. Like you were saying, is a police report going to be necessary? Or maybe you just, you know, call the rape crisis center and like that is enough. Or maybe it's not. Maybe you need to actually file a police report, because we know that not all of the folks, first of all, most of them probably don't even call a crisis center. On top of that, the ones who do, not all file a police report. So I don't see how putting in like requirements that need to be met is going to benefit anybody.
No, you're absolutely right. And that makes their efforts to include people disingenuous anyway. You know, and really, again, back to the Texas bill, if you really think that abortion is murder always, then don't put in a rape and incest exception. What you're telling us there is it isn't really about what you're saying it's about. If you're
Oh no, my hack did not work. Nicole has cut out again. Oh, can you hear me?
Oh, I just saw, yeah, I can hear you. I just saw that you put to Ty to jump in, but
Oh, no, I meant like when you were done. So yes.
Yeah, well, I'm done. I mean, basically just the fact that like if you're including rape and incest exceptions, then you're basically saying that what we're talking about, the fetus, isn't really our main concern if you're willing to put in any exceptions at all. You know, I don't think there should be any exceptions at all to the fact that we shouldn't kill people, that there should not be a death penalty. But I don't say, well, except for maybe for terrorists, right? You know, if you are allowing exceptions, what you're saying is what you believe isn't really what you believe.
That's a good point. That's a good point. Ty, now I'll let you jump in. What do you think?
Okay. Yeah, I think it really just comes down to wanting to control people's bodies. Like it has nothing to do with, you know, and all these religious excuses. It's like, you're not a saint, like you've sinned, you know, and like to put this in like intense pressure on people who can, you know, give birth. It's just, it's super traumatizing. And I think like even when we think about going back to what Nicole was saying about like reporting and how like inconvenient and like impossible it is for children who are being raped by their family members. I think like even often rape isn't a word that a lot of victims like to use. Like it's uncomfortable to admit to being raped. And a lot of times I had to do some research on this my sophomore year, and a lot of people just would say I had forced sex, or someone I didn't really want to have sex with in court cases because they were uncomfortable saying that they were raped. So like, as hard as it is to prove that you were raped in general, if you're not able to, you know, accept the fact that you were raped, it's going to be that much more difficult trying to prove it, because oftentimes it's somebody that you love or you care about that commits this kind of like act against you. It's not always strangers. And going back to also what Nicole was saying, this was literally legalized, like to rape your wife, like until like dangerously recently. But it totally reinforces like intimate partner violence surrounding like the idea that rape only occurs between strangers, or it's like the guy that jumps out of the bushes. Like it's not always like that anymore. So yeah, I think a lot of like the notions around rape like all these policymakers that care so much. It's like, why don't you go talk to a victim? Why don't you go talk to somebody who survived rape? Like, it's not always, you know, this crazy thing. Like, it often is sometimes that you care about or that you love.
Right. Great. Go ahead, Brynne.
Oh, dang it, what was I gonna say? Oh, sorry, I
Go
was thinking about like what would I was gonna say. What's my train of thought? Sorry. I was just thinking about there are people, you know, who say, oh, but it's a life, oh, but this. Do you care so much about lives? There are thousands of children in foster care in South Carolina that you could make their lives better, and they're actually on this earth living rather than a little fetus in a tummy. And that is just something that I was thinking about, like the foster care system. And I don't
Not
know.
even that. It's like the person that's carrying the child. You don't care about the living being on this earth already that is literally carrying a child, but you carry that thing, this little thing, this clump of cells, and they're like, oh, it's a heartbeat. I'm like,
Right.
if you took any kind of biology class, you would know that the heart, that is not a heartbeat. That is literally the formation of clumping of cells making that noise.
Yep. That's a good point for the whole, like, oh, you know, carry the pregnancy, give it up for adoption. Okay, but like to who? We've got tons of kids, like you said, in foster care. So who are we giving this up to adoption to? There's tons of people, tons of children who could already be adopted or even just fostered. And no, are you going to adopt or foster them? Like, no, you're probably not. So that is another frustrating thing. The people who say that, you know, they're not actually going to go out and help any children who already are alive and, you know, in body and need someone to take care of them. But something I wanted to point out when we're talking about, you know, like sexual violence, and so someone who was assaulted needing an abortion, as far as like students go, like college students and whatnot, transgender students are already at like an increased risk for sexual violence. So imagine, you know, it's like 21% of transgender students have been sexually assaulted compared to like 18% of non-transgender students being assaulted. So imagine, you know, you're trans and you're assaulted and you're trying to seek an abortion. Like, you already have a barrier to reproductive health care by being trans. Now you are also, you know, you were a sexual assault victim too. So you have to go through these different things to like get to the result that you want. And it's just more barriers being placed. So I thought that was important to point out because that's another hurdle that, you know, would be added for them.
You are totally right. And, you know, being in rape crisis, the number of trans people that we saw was definitely higher than the number of trans people in the general population, just because they are at such increased risk. And I wanted to go back to something that Ty said, because I felt like it was a really, really good point. I don't remember the exact statistic, but something like 60% of rape survivors who meet the legal definition of rape do not identify as having experienced a rape. They might in the future, but they don't right then. It is just such a mind-boggling thing to process. And like she said, you know, over 75% of rape is committed by someone the person knows, usually by someone the person knows pretty intimately, a really good friend, their own boyfriend, their boyfriend's best friend, you know, their cousin, their mom's best friend from college, whoever it is. That it's not just about, you know, I can't count the number of times where I've been in the hospital talking to the police and the victim will be saying, I don't want to get this person in trouble. You know, they're a good person, they made a mistake. And, you know, that is also a barrier. If you're going to make saying that it was rape a barrier to getting an abortion, well, 60% of people who have been raped don't really understand that they've been sexually assaulted. It's just, it really is to me both a way of limiting who can access it, which is just wrong in the first place. Everybody deserves to have access to any healthcare that they need. But also, you know, I really think in my heart of hearts that I don't want to give them this much credit for being this diabolical, because I don't think they know enough about rape to actually have thought this through. But I do think it's a way that, like, okay, let's say these did get enacted and rape and incest was the only exception. In 3 years, they could say, like, well, we've only had, 700 women countrywide use this exception. This is clearly not something that is really all that necessary. And like I said, I don't know if they have the foresight to do that, or if this is just their way of like making these bills a little more palatable, that like, well, but if you're raped, we'll still let you have an abortion. Come on, ladies, get on board, But it really, I think, is a way of, in the future, saying like, this isn't even a population who needs to access abortion, because if you make it contingent on actually vocalizing what happened to you, a lot of people can't even do that. I've talked to so many survivors who call 10 years, 20 years, 50 years after the incident and have just now realized that the reason they've had all these mental health symptoms for so long is because they were sexually assaulted and didn't understand that that's what happened to them. All of these bills, like you were saying, Ashlyn, just show a really disturbing fundamental misunderstanding of what happens to a person after they experience trauma. As if after you experience trauma, everyone reacts the same way, everyone acts logically, and everyone acts in their own best interest, which none of that is true. I used to really be a proponent before I started in Rape Crisis. I was very passionate that you should always report sexual assault. You should always go to the police. The only way this is going to change is if it's reported in such large numbers that the police can't ignore it anymore. And now 5 years later, I'm like, I don't even know if I'd report my own sexual assault because of what happens after the fact. I think it would depend a lot on what the circumstances of it were. And so I really think that, God bless people who've been so privileged that they don't have to deal with sexual assault. I wish that for everyone. But people who have never had to deal with sexual assault should not be the people writing laws about who can access abortion. It is just not, and really anyone who doesn't understand the psychology of trauma.
I totally agree. Yeah. That is a good point to make. That's definitely a good point. And I think that it's what you had mentioned, that they kind of just don't want to be seen as like totally heartless, which, like, no, we still think you're heartless. So it's not protecting your your reputation any. Doesn't make us think good of you that, oh no, I can't have an abortion unless I'm raped, but if I'm raped, then I can have an abortion. Like, no, that does nothing for me. It doesn't make me think that you're not totally evil. I think it's just a way to kind of like hide behind that. And I agree that I could see it in the future being used as, well, we've only had this amount reported and, dealt with, so it's not really a problem. So we could just take this out of the legislation as it is and just leave it as no abortions ever.
Yeah, I mean, that's the end game, right?
Mm-hmm.
The end game is to make it so difficult to obtain that people stop obtaining it, and then they say, see, we don't need it.
Right. Ty, I thought I saw something trying to come out of your face. Like a thought trying to leave your brain.
Yeah, I forget that like Zoom is so weird. Like I just want to like blurt out all the time. But I think like it's also like super exploitational. Like, why do I have to disclose that I was sexually assaulted or that, my father raped me? Like, you don't have to, you shouldn't have to disclose those types of information. Like, they're deeply personal and, like Nicole was saying, traumatizing experiences. Like, I just don't understand why. Because you're not there to help with the emotional like support that's needed after that. Like, you don't care about what happens to that victim afterwards. You just care what happened to them for what, a statistic? Like, I never truly understood why. And kind of like Nicole was saying, like the exception rule, it's so stupid. Like, how are you going to tell me like I don't deserve something because of this, or I'm not allowed to do this because someone without a uterus is trying to make decisions for me. Like you said, Ashlyn, somebody without a uterus shouldn't be making a decision for someone with a uterus. Like, yeah.
Great. Sam posted on Facebook that having those exceptions brings back in the double standards mentioned earlier in the conversation, that it's the pregnant person's fault unless you were raped. And then it's like, okay, well, it wasn't your fault, so we'll let you have this access that you wouldn't get if it was your fault for becoming pregnant. And I think that's an important thing to remember too, because that's it. They're, placing blame on one person when, it doesn't really matter. You should have access to getting an abortion for any reason and for no reason.
Yeah, I love that point from Sam, because it goes to the idea that, like, if you don't officially report can you guys hear me? Okay. I love that point. And I also loved what Ty and Brynne were saying, because there should never be a litmus test that you have to pass in order to deserve healthcare. Like, if I get shot and they take me to the emergency room, they can't ask me, like, well, did you provoke the guy? Is it your fault that you got shot? Because if you were somewhere you weren't supposed to be, I'm not going to treat you because this is your own fault. You shouldn't, if you need insulin because you have diabetes and someone decides that you have diabetes because you're too fat, like, you shouldn't have to prove that you're eating healthily to get access to insulin. Like, there just shouldn't be any litmus test for any form of healthcare. Every single person deserves healthcare, regardless and unrelated to what is happening in their life. It just is really, it's one of those things that we don't do this for any other common medical procedure. Someone goes into the hospital because they have appendicitis, and no one asks them, well, if we take out your appendix, what are you going to do to make sure you live a life deserving of this surgery? Like, what the hell? Why would we even answer that? We'd just be like, I don't want to die, man. My appendix is going to burst. So it really, the idea that, oh, we'll make this available for people, and like Ashlyn said, who deserve it, is really, really twisted. And the idea that somehow a rape survivor deserves it more than someone who wasn't raped or doesn't know how to vocalize that she was raped, or even someone who had birth control fail, or someone who already has 3 kids and doesn't want to have another kid. There is just, I feel like we have to talk about rape and incest and why it's important that those people have access to abortion. But I feel like it's a way to pit us against each other, when really we're all on the same page. Abortion is overwhelmingly popular in this country. There's really no reason why we should still be in these trenches. And I think pointing out, like we were talking about earlier, like, if you'll allow an exception for rape and incest survivors, then what you're saying to me is that you don't think every life is sacred. Either put your money where your mouth is, or let us all have access to abortion. Or are you saying that that once a woman or a person is sexually assaulted, that they're somehow tainted in some way, and so it's okay to get rid of those babies? What are we talking about here? And so there's so many ways I feel insulted by this exception that it's almost hard to feel happy that, like, oh, well, at least those people who desperately need it can still access it, because it really is just, it's so insulting. I don't know what other word to say about it, that, like, we're going to be so distracted by this that we're going to miss the bigger picture, which is that everyone deserves to have an abortion all the time, like Ashlyn said, for any reason or for no reason. It's a religious mandate not to have abortions, and in this country we can't make laws based on religious mandates. So what are we even, sorry, another on my soapbox, but it really is,
This one didn't get cut off, so keep going.
I want rape and incest survivors to always have this right, but writing into the law, and if they're the only people who can access it, who is going to
And now
provide it? We already have only 2 in the state of South Carolina. Like, if only a small percentage of the population can access abortion, like, where are they going to get it?
Right. Right. And going back to, once again, like, we want them to have this sort of support and these resources, but they're probably not going to be any more likely to access them if they have to name and put on record what happened to them, when most of the time people who are victims of sexual violence don't want to do that as it is. So you make it more complicated in cases of incest. And then the fact that, like Ty said, most rapes occur from someone that you knew, not a stranger. So it's not going to be any more accessible if you have to prove these things. If you aren't keeping a paper trail because you just want to forget about it, and just get out of the hospital and get home, and if you go to the hospital, not going to make it accessible. So the only thing that will make it accessible is to protect abortion for everyone at any stage, that is allowed, any stage, until I don't know what week it stops, because we get into then late term abortions, which really are unviable fetuses at that point. Those are almost always people who wanted those babies, and it ends up being life threatening for the mom, or it ends up being that there's something wrong with the baby, that it cannot continue, and they have to have what is called basically a birth. It's not, those are classified as abortions, and I think a lot of people don't realize that late term abortion is just like a political buzzword that people use to get y'all riled up. There are people who genuinely believe that you can have an abortion up until like the day your child is due, and that's just not the case.
Yeah. All of that. And also, I'm sorry, but the idea that any of these people actually care about rape survivors is hilarious. They've not done a single thing to make us believe that. Greg Abbott saying, well, we're going to make sure that we don't need this exception because we're not going to allow rape anymore. It's like, are you telling me you could have stopped it this whole time? Like, that's fantastic. I would love that. Like, I would love a world where rape crisis centers.
How that happens.
Right. I'll be the first one to campaign for Greg Abbott's reelection if he can actually stop all rape from occurring. Like, that would be quite an achievement. But it really is, again, to add insult to injury, the idea that any of these, people, I'll just be nice, not the first word that came to mind, but that they actually care about rape and incest survivors, is when every single action and bill they've ever passed is completely to the contrary of that. I mean, how long did it take to get VAWA reauthorized? It's just, which VAWA has shown like a tremendous impact in the decrease of domestic violence. And it never really was political until very recently. I just, the idea that like, well, if we allow these exceptions, we're showing that we understand this. Like, you don't give half of a flaming whoop about rape survivors. We all know that. And so let's not pretend like you're carving out this special exemption to help them. You're doing it because or at least someone has told you that they're not going to access it anyway. So,
right. And, you mentioned like domestic violence. I mean, speaking about our own lovely state here, we are always in like the top 5 or 6 for women killed by men. So, we have a problem with domestic violence. And you would think that that might be concerning to our state legislature, but instead it seems they're more concerned with preventing people from having reproductive rights to abortion. So yeah, I mean, they've showed, like you've said, they've showed that they don't care. They don't care about victims of any sort of intimate partner violence, whether it's, sexual or domestic based, like physical, emotional, any sort of abuse. They just don't care about it. So I guess what hope do we have, Nicole?
What hope do I have? Well,
any of us have? What do we have?
Well, I will say the fact that the great majority of people in this country are in favor of abortion rights will always be a beacon of hope, right? We have gerrymandered district and we have Republican legislatures in charge of states and are pushing some of these things through. But the truth is, you know, our populace is becoming more liberal. All the studies show that we're moving left, and these people are just trying to drag us back, and they cannot do it. It can't be done. You know, that is not how the arc of the universe moves. So, you know, and honestly, seeing people like Brynne and Ty and seeing the next generation of hellraisers out there, you know, I feel like this next generation really gets it in a way that I don't want to say us millennials don't get it or didn't get it, or even Gen Xers or even baby boomers, but you know, the Gen Zers, the Zoomers were raised from birth with these ideas that it's never the victim's fault, that everyone deserves healthcare, that you shouldn't have to work yourself to death in order to deserve dignity, you know, that you can't be exploited, you know, things like that, that really didn't come into my consciousness until college. And same for the Gen Xers, you know, you guys were raised from the womb with these ideas. And I love that. It really does give me hope. So that's, I mean, hope is always with the youth, right? But I would say it's also with, you know, people want action on climate change. People want unions, and people want abortion access. Like, we can't forget that the majority of people are in favor of these things. You know, that we have to remember that, and remember, we're not fighting a losing battle. We're fighting for the winning side.
That's all very good, and very good points. And I just want to point out to Ty and Brynne, because they don't know you, Nicole, so they probably don't know this, but if you think Nicole's good with words, she's an author. So that is why she's so good with words. Yes. So she makes even like the most, I feel like, basic like questions or answers like sound way more elegant. So I just had to plug that for you, Nicole.
Thanks, bruh.
But yeah, Ty and Brynne, go ahead. Why don't you guys weigh in on that too? Yeah, Brynne, go first. I feel like you're raising your hand. I'm not a teacher. Just yell at me.
We'll do that. But I just think it really just all comes down to how blurry it all is. Like, you can't say you can have an abortion, you can't. Like, there's too much happening with that. It's not going to do any good. Yeah, it's just so blurry. There is no right and wrong, and it's all subjective. It's not objective. Like, I don't know. Well, it's objective that women deserve health care. Let me just put that out there. But not subjective to the fact that you don't get to pick and choose what you think is right and wrong and what stupid. Go ahead, Ty.
I'm unclear of the question, but I always am willing to just rant.
Whatever's on your mind.
Yeah. I think like it just shows like how much men love to police women's bodies, and I think that it's a really big political game for a lot of our politicians is to be openly like anti-women, anti-abortion. It really like it thrives a lot of their political campaigns, and it's super like scary seeing like how open like pastors who are politicians like, and I don't know if anyone's seen like videos on Twitter and they're like, and praise Jesus and save the babies, and like, and they're freaking out, and I'm like, people actually like believe in this shit. Like it's kind of crazy. But yeah, I think like often when we talk about abortion, it's just such a taboo topic as well, Brynne. Like, as blurred as it is, it's because it's so hated on. Like, even having these conversations with people at school, and even activists like are uncomfortable with abortion, and they think that they don't have to weigh in on these issues, and that's like another issue. It's like the people that think their vote doesn't matter. But it's like, it's all about like education too, and not everyone has that education. And like Brynne was saying, it's just so blurred. People care about the fetus, but they don't care once it comes out, or if it's trans, or if they're gay, or if they're low income. There's a million and one things, and $100,000 at minimum that comes with having a child. So it really shouldn't be up to anybody else other than yourself. I mean, I know even just like all reproductive rights in general are they're always being attacked, like birth control and the people outside of clinics, and just everything that comes with having a uterus sucks. So yeah, I think it just, a lot of education needs to happen, and men that can do the work, I really appreciate them, because I know it's hard work. Even being like a woman who just advocates for abortion, people are like, oh, you can't be pro-abortion. I am 100% pro-abortion. Get that abortion. I do not care. It has nothing to do with me. It is not my body. It is not my income that's affecting. It's just like, do whatever you want. I'm random, but that's kind of what I do. I think like just knowing what is going on in Texas, and like even what's going on in Afghanistan, like a lot of women are being attacked right now, and it's really unfortunate that we don't have that many people caring about it in this country, the greatest country in the world. Yeah.
Sorry, you were talking about how it does come down to like education. Like, people need to be taught. And I'm taking a gender communication class right now. And when we watched this video of this study that was being done with children, and how boys talked and how girls talked, and boys were like always trying to one up each other, and they were like 4 years old, and women were like, oh, me too, like being here, but men were always trying to top each other. And it's like, I don't get how, like, even when they were kids, like, I don't know, education needs to be done, and women should be making laws for women's bodies, and men who do this don't get to do this for women. So I don't know, thought that was interesting.
I just want to add one last thing, since we've been talking about survivors of sexual assault, and that is the easiest way to make sure that everyone, including assault survivors, always have access to abortion, is to believe people when they tell you they've been sexually assaulted. If anyone tells you they've been sexually assaulted, if you do nothing else but say, I believe you, this wasn't your fault, you will change their life forever. You will. You have that power. And I've said this a lot, and Ashlyn's heard me say this probably 100 million times, so sorry to go through it again, but if you believe someone who tells you they've been sexually assaulted, that usually comes with consequences for you. You have to stand up for them. You have to be there for them. And more often than not, it involves reassessing what you feel about someone in your circle, and your family, and your group of friends, because those are who your rapists are. And the only thing that a rapist asks you to do is nothing. And that's why people tend to fall on that side, right? It's really hard to be an advocate, and it's really easy to say, well, sorry, I don't believe you. But I do presentations on this, there's been research on it, but the people who falsely report rape are the same people who falsely report other types of crimes for the same reasons. If someone doesn't have a motive, then there's probably not making it up. And by the way, getting attention is not a motive. So anyone who says that can just tell their story walking. But really, we're talking about rape and incest, we're talking about abortion access, but all of this boils down to people who have survived sexual assault would have access if they felt that they could tell people about what happened to them. And it's not all about people who work at rape crisis or doctors or cops. Like, more often than not, it's just the people in your own life. And I just really implore those of you out there, if you've made it this far and you're still on the fence, just believe people who say that they've been sexually assaulted. And this includes media cases, right? When everyone's like, oh, I don't know, and this guy's really rich and he'd never get with her, to just even say on your Twitter or do a TikTok or whatever the kids are using these days, to just say, I believe the victim. There's no reason not to. What you say out loud matters, because 1 in 6 women, and I think it's down to 1 in 12 men, and it's getting lower because men underreport, have been sexually assaulted. The people in your lives are listening to this. They're hearing this. And so I'd be remiss if I didn't say that as an advocate, that every single one of us has the power to make things better for survivors. And
Mark Zuckerberg's at it again. Can't hear ya. Yep, no dice, can't hear. That's a good point though. Anytime there is a case in the media where, someone's claiming that they were sexually assaulted, it's always interesting to see like who's going to speak up on Twitter or Instagram or Facebook or whatnot. And I always like to remind people that this certain actor or this certain musician's not going to see what you have to say, but your friends who have been assaulted are going to see what you say. So what you say is just going to harm someone that in your life. You may not know they were assaulted, but this person, they're your friend. What you say is going to hurt them. So if you don't have anything supportive to say about these, media cases that we all hear about every once in a while where someone was a victim of abuse, if you don't have anything supportive to say, then just be quiet, because that person's not going to be affected by your words, but your friends and your family are going to be affected by your words. And that I think that was a good thing to piggyback off on with Nicole, since Mark Zuckerberg decided to silence her again. We'll see if she's back now. Nicole, can you try to speak?
Damn you, Zuckerberg!
I hate him.
Who's the Mark Zuckerberg of Zoom?
I don't
know.
Zoom? Who is the Zoom person? That's a good question. I just assume everything's Mark Zuckerberg, but
it's owned by like Enron or something. I don't know.
They're all the same to me. But that's a good point. And I feel like Brynne has something she wants to say. Yes? Or are you looking something up?
No, I was looking up who invented Zoom. That was my typing face. Sorry.
Okay.
Nope.
It looks like a thinking face too. But, maybe Nicole got me thinking a good idea for Ty and Brynne to do on campus is, go around and ask a bunch of dudes, if you're pregnant, would you get an abortion? Or even like go around and ask them, like, if you could take birth control so your partner didn't have to, like, would you take birth control? And like, see how many of them are willing to like do this stuff, because I feel like they would not take birth control. They probably would say that they'd get an abortion.
I actually saw this thing, and they were asking like guys, it was like, okay, like, do you think like women should get an abortion like if they don't want it? And they're like, no. And they're like, all right, do you think that women should get an abortion if like they can't afford it? And they're like, nah. And they're like, okay, do you think like your girlfriend like of a few months should get an abortion and you're in college? And they're like, and it's like, oh, like now you switch it up because you don't want a kid and you want to be a father. Maybe I don't want to be a mother. Like, so yeah, actually, Brynne, I would like to do that. Maybe we can indoctrinate some people at Coastal.
Yes, that sounds like a good TikTok project for you once you get your little microphone. That would be fantastic. But this will be like my little last call for any like closing thoughts, anything that has like come up in your mind that you want to mention before we wrap up, because Nicole said she couldn't talk for an hour and a half, but we have talked for an hour and a half. So here we are.
I just want to thank you for putting this together, Ashlyn. You're such the Grand Strand is lucky to have you, and I love you.
I love you too and miss you. And I'm a little offended. I didn't know you were back in South Carolina, but I'll let it slide.
Thanks.
We're still in a pandemic. I will let it slide. Looking at my lovely coastal students over there. Anything else you want to add? Any other thoughts?
Yeah, so the, I guess, title or name of this live stream was Why Rape and Incest Exceptions Aren't Enough. I just want to say, it's none of your business why it's not and why it's not enough. That's it. That should be the point.
That's a good, yes, that's a great closing statement, Brynne. Very powerful.
Thank you very much. You're welcome.
Yeah, I'll just thank Nicole. I think that what you do is just amazing work. I know like even volunteering, it definitely weighs heavy on the heart. So I think that it's really amazing that you continue doing this work because it's necessary and it's hard. And I'm glad that people like you exist and are out there for survivors, being kind of like that outlet for them. Also, Ashlyn, I love you too. I don't know if that matters, but yeah.
Of course. It does. Thank you so much. And I just want to say this is the first of a couple abortion like centered live streams we're gonna do. We're gonna do a couple coming up that are only on Instagram because fortunately the software that I have it's not compatible with Instagram and Facebook and YouTube and Twitter. So we're gonna mosey on over to Instagram for a few, but the whole thing is to try and reframe the narrative and help people to understand the seemingly hard concept that abortion is healthcare. It's not anything about your politics. It's not your religion. It's nothing. It's just a medical procedure that someone should be able to choose for themselves. And my last thought is just that, you know, people say that they want to, I guess, reduce abortions, but I have known many people who have wanted to get their tubes tied before and like they did not want kids. So they had no kids. They knew they never wanted kids. They wanted their tubes tied. No doctors would do it because they might change their mind. Or, you know, what does your husband think? Or you're not married. Oh, okay. Well, you might meet someone and then change your mind. So, I mean, that's another problem. If people know that they don't want kids and you will not give them a tubal litigation and then they get pregnant because they can't get the procedure that they wanted in the first place, like, I'm sorry, they tried to take care of it in the beginning, but we make these things so hard for everybody because it comes down to wanting to police people's bodies, primarily women, people with uteruses. We just apparently no one wants to let us make our own decisions. So I'm just going to end on that and say that we have a live stream coming up with Dr. Jennifer Schlosser. Jenny, I'm sorry, I butcher your last name every time I say it. And it is about her bail fund that she just started for Horry County. So that one is going to be on November 3rd. She just started a free bail fund to, you know, help people who have no other reason for being like in jail still other than they can't afford their bail. So it was definitely something that this county needs. So she's going to come on and talk to us about that and tell us some details about, you know, how people can help, how they can get involved, you know, like what her plan is and all of that, everything that entails that. It's very new. She just announced this within maybe a week or so. Following that, we have something coming up that actually hasn't been created yet, but we're going to do one focusing on abortion centered on LGBTQ and specifically like trans healthcare with abortion, just because there are so many more hurdles that they have to accessing abortion or reproductive care in general. And for an in-person event, everybody, we have the old Concord House. And if you aren't familiar with the case of Tristan Brynne, he was murdered on September 11th by the South Carolina Law Enforcement Division. He was stopped for a cracked windshield, and it hasn't really made like major headlines. Like I had to like go seek this information out once my friend told me about this. So he obviously should not have been killed by a cop. There is, you know, an attorney representing the family. There's legal things that are happening, but we are showing up on October 30th to the old Conway Courthouse to just join in solidarity with the community and with the family for demanding accountability for those actions. The attorney for the family has shown that, you know, stopping someone over a cracked windshield is unlawful. So therefore, everything that happened afterwards is also unlawful. So once again, you know, we have to juggle a million issues at once, but Black Lives Matter and Black men should not be killed by police when they're just trying to go about their business. Those are the only things we have on the agenda for upcoming events, but, you know, keep posted on Facebook and we will update you as far as anything else we're doing. If you're a coastal student, go see Ty and Brynne and our other two coastal students, Sydney and Brianna, on I think Monday. You guys are doing a voter registration drive, and that is really it. We thank you for tuning in, and thanks for listening to my hoarseness and for letting Nicole join us and hear from her and all of her expertise. So thank you, Nicole, for coming on, and sorry about the connection problems, but you know, we still got a lot of your lovely rants, I think. So I'm glad.
They work better without a face to them. They're better faceless, just disembodied ranting.
Imagine who's behind the screen. Like,
right. Could be anybody. It's Mark Zuckerberg. No, I'm just kidding.
Oh my goodness. Thank you so much, everybody. Thanks for tuning in, and I will talk to you